The wind, a mournful voice across the vast, undulating plains of 1878, was Istis's most constant companion. It whispered through the tall, sun-bleached grasses, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant rain, and sometimes, it seemed to her, the faint, lingering aroma of wood smoke from a life that was no more. Her lodge, set a little apart from the main camp of her Sikangu Lakota band, stood resilient against the unending breath of the grasslands, a solitary testament to a sorrow that had become the bedrock of her existence. Winter was loosening its grip, but the chill lingered in the mornings, a mirror to the coldness that had settled deep within her since the day Tashunka and the other warriors had returned without her husband, Mato, his spirit released on a southern raid against the Comanche. Loss had carved Istis into a creature of silence and shadow. Before, laughter had come easily, her hands quick to bead intricate patterns, her voice one of the strongest in the women's chorus during celebrations. Now, her movements were deliberate, economical, her words few. She performed her tasks, scraping hides, gathering roots and berries, mending, with a competence that brooked no argument, yet her eyes, dark and deep-set, held a permanent distance, as if looking at something far beyond the horizon, something only she could see. The other women, once her friends, now offered pitying glances and hesitant courtesies, their kindness a barrier she could not or would not breach. She was a reminder of what could be lost, a living embodiment of grief, and her quiet sorrow made them uneasy. So she kept to herself, her heart a frozen pond where only the faintest ripples of memory disturbed the ice. Her routine was the rhythm of survival, each day a repetition of the last. She rose before the sun, the air sharp and clean in her lungs, and walked to the creek, its waters still frigid from the mountain snowmelt. She gathered firewood, tended her small snares, processed what little game she caught or what was shared with her out of tribal obligation. The vastness of the land, which once had filled her with a sense of belonging, now often felt like an oppressive weight, emphasizing her solitude. The Paha Sapa, the sacred Black Hills, loomed in the distance, their dark slopes a promise of spiritual solace she no longer felt worthy to seek. She was adrift, a canoe without a paddler, moving only where the currents of necessity dictated. One late afternoon, as a sky bruised into shades of purple and orange threatened an early twilight, Istis was checking a line of snares she had set along a game trail that wound through a dense copse of cottonwoods, a place rarely frequented by others. The wind was picking up, carrying with it the metallic tang of an approaching storm. A rabbit, its neck broken cleanly, lay in the first snare. As she knelt to retrieve it, a sound, faint and guttural, reached her ears, nearly lost in the rising moan of the wind. It was not the sound of any animal she knew. Her hand instinctively went to the knife at her belt. She moved with the caution of a doe, her senses straining. The sound came again, a pained exhalation, followed by a low curse in a language that was not Lakota, yet chillingly familiar. It was the tongue of the Comanche, the very people who had stolen her husband, the people her heart had been taught to despise with a cold, enduring fury. Hidden by a thicket of wild plums, she saw him. He lay sprawled at the base of a large, weathered rock, half concealed by fallen leaves and encroaching shadows. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, dark blood staining his buckskin legging and pooling on the thirsty earth beneath. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. His face, contorted in pain, was daubed with faded war paint, his black hair matted with sweat and dirt. A broken bow lay near one outstretched hand, and an empty quiver was flung further away. He was young, perhaps a few summers older than Mato had been, lean and powerfully built despite his obvious suffering. An enemy, helpless. Istis's heart hammered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat of fear, hatred, and a bewildering, unwelcome flicker of something else, a reluctant stirring of the healer's instinct that had once been a strong part of her. He was Comanche. He was the reason Mato was gone. Every fiber of her being screamed to leave him, to let the storm and his wounds claim him, a just retribution. She could turn, walk away, and no one would ever know. It would be an easy vengeance. But as she watched, a tremor ran through his body, and a low moan escaped his lips, a sound of pure animalistic agony that transcended tribal hatred. It was the sound of a human being in torment. Her feet remained rooted to the ground, The wind howled like a thing grieving, whipping her hair across her face, stinging her eyes. Mato's face, laughing and vibrant, flashed in her mind, and then, inexplicably, the face of her own brother when he had fallen from a horse as a child, his small face pale with pain until she had reached him. He shifted, his eyes cracking open, glazed with fever but still holding a spark of warrior's defiance as they met hers. There was no plea in them, only a raw awareness of his predicament, and perhaps a resignation to his fate at the hands of a Lakota woman. For a long moment, they stared at each other, the dying light and the rising wind their only witnesses. The storm was about to break. The first fat raindrops began to fall, cold and heavy. Istis made a decision then, one that seemed to rise from a place deeper than conscious thought, a place where grief and hatred had not entirely extinguished an older, more fundamental humanity. She straightened, her face unreadable. Slowly, deliberately, she unslung the water skin from her shoulder and walked towards him. The Comanche warrior watched her approach, his hand inching towards a knife sheathed at his hip, his movement weak but determined. Istis stopped a few feet away, holding out the water skin. "Pa," she said, using a Comanche word for water she had learned from captives long ago, her voice rusty from disuse. His eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with desperate thirst. He did not move. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, washing away some of the grime, revealing the harsh planes of his face. Istis knelt, placing the water skin on the ground between them. She then backed away a step, showing her empty hands. The rain was coming down harder now, a relentless torrent that soaked them both in moments. He watched her, his gaze unwavering. Then, with a visible effort that cost him dearly, he reached for the water skin. His fingers fumbled with the stopper before he managed to raise it to his cracked lips, drinking in deep, shuddering gulps. Istis watched him, her expression unchanging. The act of giving water to an enemy felt like a betrayal of Mato, yet a strange, almost forgotten sensation stirred within her, not kindness, not yet, but a sense of profound, unsettling connection to this suffering human. When he had drunk his fill, he let the water skin fall from his grasp. His eyes, though still clouded with pain, held a flicker of something new, confusion perhaps, or a grudging acknowledgement. The storm raged around them, the wind tearing at the trees, the rain a solid sheet. He would not survive the night out here, not with his injury and the fever she could now see burning in his eyes. Istis knew what she had to do, though every instinct for self-preservation, every ingrained lesson of tribal loyalty, screamed against it. She pointed towards the direction of her secluded lodge. "Come," she said, this time in Lakota, the words stark and commanding. Then she turned and began to walk, not looking back to see if he would or could follow. She knew the struggle it would cost him, the agony of moving with that shattered leg. Part of her, the grieving widow, almost hoped he would fail. But another part, the woman who had once known compassion, walked on, leading the way into the deepening, storm-lashed darkness. He did follow. She heard him, the grunts of pain, the scraping sound as he dragged his injured leg, the heavy, labored breathing. It was a slow, torturous journey, the short distance to her lodge stretching into an eternity. She did not offer help, nor did he ask for it. An unspoken understanding, fragile and tense, existed between them. She had offered a chance, he had to take it. The rain had washed the world clean, leaving it raw and exposed, much like the emotions churning within Istis. Inside her small circular lodge, the air was warmer, the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs a comforting familiarity that now felt alien with his presence. A low fire smoldered in the central pit. Istis gestured for him to lie on a pile of buffalo robes in the corner, the farthest point from her own sleeping furs. He collapsed onto them with a groan, his face pale and slick with sweat. For the next several days, a strange, silent rhythm established itself within the confines of the lodge. Istis tended to his wound with the practiced skill her grandmother had taught her. She cleaned it, applied a poultice of chewed willow bark and yarrow to draw out the fever and infection, and bound it tightly with strips of clean hide. His leg was badly broken, the bone splintered. She did her best to set it, the act causing him to cry out, a raw, choked sound that he quickly suppressed, his jaw clenched, sweat beading on his brow. During these ministrations, neither spoke. His eyes, dark and intense, followed her every move, filled with a mixture of pain, suspicion, and a dawning reluctant awareness of her care. She cooked for him, simple broths and roasted rabbit, leaving the food near him without a word. He ate, slowly at first, then with the hunger of a man starved. She kept the fire going, fetched water, and went about her daily chores, always conscious of his presence, a dangerous, unpredictable element in her solitary world. The silence in the lodge was thick, broken only by the crackle of the fire, his occasional pained sighs, or the rustle of her movements. She found herself observing him, the way his strong hands lay limp at his sides, the harsh lines of his face softening slightly in sleep, the way his gaze sometimes drifted to the smoke hole, as if longing for the open sky. He was a Comanche, a Num, the enemy. She reminded herself of this constantly. She saw Mato's face in the flames, heard his laughter in the wind. Yet the man lying on her robes was not a faceless warrior from a hated tribe. He was an individual, breathing, suffering, dependent on her for his very survival. The boundaries of her hatred, once so clear and sharp, began to blur, like watercolors left in the rain. One evening, after she had redressed his wound, he spoke. His voice was raspy, weak, but the Lakota words were surprisingly clear. "Why?" Istus paused, her back to him as she washed her hands in a wooden bowl. She did not turn. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Why save an enemy? Why risk her own safety, her standing with her people? She had no easy answer, not even for herself. "The storm," she said finally, her voice low. "No one should die alone in a storm." He was silent for a long moment. Then, "My name is Moketavato." Istus did not offer her own name in return. Acknowledgement of his identity was one thing. Sharing hers felt like a step too far, a bridge she was not yet ready to cross. But a name, spoken aloud, had power. He was no longer just the Comanche, he was Moketavato, a person. Slowly, cautiously, the wall of silence between them began to crack. Moketavato, as his strength returned in small increments, would watch her work, his eyes thoughtful. Sometimes he would ask a simple question in Lakota about what she was doing, or comment on the weather. Istus would answer tersely, yet she found herself listening for his voice, a strange counterpoint to the familiar sounds of her solitude. She learned that he had been separated from his raiding party during a skirmish with a Pawnee hunting group, further south than his people usually ventured. His horse had been killed, and he had been trying to make his way back to his own territory, already injured, when he had fallen and broken his leg badly. He spoke little of his own tribe, or the reasons for the raid, and Istus did not ask. Their truce was too fragile for such questions. One afternoon, while Istus was outside mending a fishing net by the creek, a shadow fell over her. She looked up, startled, to see Moketavato standing at the entrance of the lodge, supporting himself with a sturdy branch he had fashioned into a crutch. It was the first time he had ventured outside on his own. He looked gaunt, but his eyes were clearer, the fever gone. He watched her for a moment. Then his gaze swept over the small, sun-dappled clearing, the whispering cottonwoods, the creek chuckling over stones. A look of longing, almost of pain, crossed his face. "It is good land," he said, his voice quiet, "peaceful." Istus nodded, her throat tight. It was peaceful, or it had been. "Your leg," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. "You should not be standing on it." He gave a wry, almost boyish grin, a startling expression on his usually stern face. "It heals. You are a good healer." He paused. "My people have healers. But perhaps not as patient with an enemy." The unspoken acknowledgement of her actions hung between them. Istus looked away, her fingers fumbling with the net. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, an unfamiliar sensation that was almost painful in its intensity. It was the first time in a long, long while that she had felt anything other than grief or a dull ache of loneliness. As the days turned into weeks, Moketavato's leg began to mend. He started to help with small tasks around the lodge, whittling arrow shafts from willow branches Istus brought him, using his good hand to help her grind corn. His presence no longer a source of constant tension, but a quiet, almost comfortable familiarity. They spoke more, sharing stories of childhood, of hunts, of the beauty of their respective lands, carefully avoiding the areas of conflict that lay like a chasm between their peoples. Istus found herself listening to his tales of the vast, arid plains of Comanche, so different from her own wooded homeland, and seeing in his eyes a love for his place that mirrored her own. She spoke of the paha sapa, of the buffalo hunts, of the winter storytelling. In these moments, they were not Lakota and Comanche, they were simply two people, finding common ground in a world determined to keep them apart. She taught him more Lakota words, and he, in turn, taught her phrases in his num-nu-tsa. Laughter, a sound Istus thought had died within her, sometimes echoed softly in the small lodge, tentative at first, then more confident. It was a fragile peace, a stolen interlude, and both of them knew it could not last. The world outside her secluded clearing continued its relentless march. One morning, the sound of approaching horses shattered their quiet routine. Istus's heart leaped into her throat. She motioned urgently for Moketavato to stay hidden inside the lodge, grabbing a discarded hide to throw over him. He moved quickly, without question, his face instantly reverting to the grim alertness of a warrior. Peeking through a small gap in the lodge flap, Istus saw them, a party of Lakota warriors, led by Tashunka himself. Tashunka, her late husband's close friend, his face now a mask of stern duty. They were heavily armed, their horses lathered, their eyes scanning the terrain with grim purpose. Her blood ran cold. Tashunka reined in his horse a short distance from her lodge, his gaze sweeping over it. Kangi, another warrior she knew well, pointed towards the faint wisps of smoke rising from her fire pit. "Istus," Tashunka called out, his voice carrying clearly. "Come out. We need to speak with you." Her mind raced. Had someone seen something? Had word of a strange man in her lodge somehow reached the main camp? She took a deep breath, schooling her features into an expression of mild inquiry, and stepped out into the sunlight, shielding her eyes as if just disturbed from her work. "Tashunka, Kangi, what brings you so far from the village?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady. Tashunka's eyes, keen and piercing, studied her face. "We are hunting Istus, Comanche, a war party broken and scattered. They raided a Cheyenne camp to the south, allies of ours, then dared to cross into our lands, killing 2 of our hunters near the Broken Antler Creek." Istus felt a chill despite the warmth of the sun. Broken Antler Creek was not far from where she had found Moketavato. "Comanche," she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "I have seen no one." "They are cunning," Kangi interjected, his gaze suspicious. "One of them is particularly dangerous. They call him Moketavato, the Black Knife. He is known for his savagery, his skill in killing. He led the raid on the Cheyenne. He carries a distinctive dark-handled knife. We have tracked him this way. He was wounded, they say." Istus's world tilted. Moketavato, Black Knife, the man whose leg she had mended, whose story she had listened to, whose laughter had tentatively bloomed in her lodge. The blood drained from her face, though she fought to keep her composure. She remembered the dark-handled knife she had seen at his belt when she first found him, the one she had carefully moved out of his reach while he was delirious with fever. It was tucked away now, hidden beneath a pile of firewood. "A dangerous man," Tashunka affirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. "He is an affront to our people, Istus, an affront to Mato's memory. We must find him. Have you seen any sign? Any stranger? Any tracks that are not your own?" Her heart thudded painfully. This was the moment. She could tell them. She could point to the lodge, and they would drag him out. It would be justice, the justice her tribe demanded, the justice her own grief had once craved. Mato's face swam before her eyes, his bright smile. But then another face appeared. Moketavato's, his eyes filled with a dawning trust as she tended his wounds, his quiet laughter as he tried to pronounce a difficult Lakota word. She met Tashunka's gaze, her own clear and unwavering. "I have seen nothing, Tashunka," she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "Only the usual game trails. The wind has been strong, it erases tracks quickly." She gestured vaguely to the west. "Perhaps he went towards the rough country by the Redwater River. It is easy to get lost there." Tashunka continued to stare at her for a long, unsettling moment, his expression unreadable. Istus held her breath, convinced he could see the truth in her eyes, hear the frantic beating of her heart. Kangi still looked unconvinced, his gaze lingering on her lodge. Then Tashunka slowly nodded. "How? It is possible. We will search there." He gathered his reins. "Be careful, Istus. These are desperate men. If you see anything, send word immediately." "I will," she promised, her voice a little too tight. The warriors wheeled their horses and galloped away, their forms receding into the vastness of the prairie. Istis stood frozen until they were mere specks in the distance. Then she sagged against the lodge frame, her legs trembling. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets, suddenly loud in the stillness. She turned and re-entered the lodge. Moketavato was sitting up, the hide cast aside, his face grim. He had heard everything. The dark-handled knife was in his hand. "Black Knife," she whispered, the name feeling alien on her tongue, yet horribly familiar. "They are hunting you." He met her gaze, his own dark and troubled. "It is a name given by my enemies," he said quietly, "not by my people." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "You lied for me, to your own kin, to the friend of your husband." Istis sank onto her sleeping furs, her head in her hands. The weight of her deception, the enormity of what she had done, pressed down on her. She had sheltered and healed the man her tribe considered their most wanted enemy, a man accused of savagery, a man whose actions had likely contributed to the ongoing strife that had cost her motto. The irony was a bitter draught. "You must go," she said, her voice hollow. "They will search this area again, if they find you here." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Moketavato nodded slowly. "I know." He looked down at his mended leg, then back at her. "I owe you my life, Istis." He spoke her name for the first time, the sound soft, almost a caress. "More than once." "It seems I have a habit of helping those I should not," she said, a humorless smile touching her lips. The image of Mato, betrayed by her actions, warred with the image of Moketavato, the man, no longer just the Comanche. "The Redwater River," he said, recalling her words to Tashunka. "Is it truly rough country?" "Yes," she confirmed, "but it leads away from Lakota lands towards the south. If you can reach it, you might find a way back to your people." She knew the risks. If he was caught, and it was discovered she had helped him, her own fate would be sealed. Ostracism would be the least of it. They spent the rest of the day in tense preparation. Istis packed a small bundle for him, dried meat, a water skin, the last of her healing herbs, and flint and steel. She gave him back his knife. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in fiery hues, she led him to the edge of the cottonwood grove, pointing him south. "Follow the creek bed as long as you can," she instructed, her voice low and urgent. "It will offer some cover. Stay off the open plains until you are well away from here. The moon will be bright tonight. Use the shadows." Moketavato stood before her, leaning on his makeshift crutch, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light. He reached out, his fingers brushing her arm, a touch that sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Istis," he began, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. He seemed to struggle for words. There is no way to thank you that is enough. You have shown me a kindness I did not deserve, from a people I have wronged." "Go, Moketavato," she urged, her own voice unsteady. "Before they return, before I change my mind." But she knew she wouldn't. The choice had been made. He held her gaze for a moment longer, a silent message passing between them, of gratitude, of regret, of a connection forged in secrecy and danger. Then he turned and melted into the growing darkness, his form quickly swallowed by the shadows. Istis watched until she could no longer see or hear him, a profound ache in her chest. She returned to her empty lodge, the silence now deafening. The place where he had lain was just a pile of furs, yet his presence lingered, an invisible imprint on the small space. She sat by the dying fire, the weight of her actions settling upon her. She had saved an enemy, a wanted man, the Black Knife. She had betrayed her husband's memory, her tribe's trust. Or had she? In the days that followed, Istis lived in a state of heightened anxiety, expecting Tashunka's return at any moment. The warriors did pass by again, their faces grim, their hunt unsuccessful. Tashunka questioned her once more, his eyes sharp, but Istis held to her story, her outward calm belying the turmoil within. He eventually seemed to accept her word, though a sliver of doubt, like a tiny splinter, remained in his gaze when he looked at her. News eventually filtered back to the main camp, carried by returning hunters and scouts. Mokitavato, the notorious Comanche war leader, had indeed escaped. Some reports said he had been seen far to the south, limping but alive, making his way back towards Comancheria. The warriors spoke of him with renewed anger and frustration, vowing to find him should he ever dare show his face in Lakota territory again. They spoke of the cunning and luck of the Black Knife. Istis listened to these reports in silence, her heart a tangled knot of emotions, relief that he was safe, fear of discovery, and a strange quiet sense of, not pride, but something akin to it. She had made a choice based not on tribal allegiance or thirst for vengeance, but on a deeper, more personal conviction. In saving Mokitavato, she had, in some paradoxical way, begun to save herself from the suffocating grip of her grief. Life in her small, isolated lodge resumed its familiar cadence, yet everything was different. The wind still whispered its mournful songs, but now Istis heard other voices in it too, echoes of Mokitavato's quiet words, his tentative laughter. The solitude no longer felt as oppressive. A small seed of connection, however improbable and dangerous, had taken root in the barren landscape of her heart. She never saw Mokitavato again. Sometimes, when she looked south towards the hazy horizon, she wondered if he thought of her, the Lakota woman who had sheltered him. She wondered if he was still the Black Knife, or if their brief, stolen time together had changed him, even in some small way, as it had undeniably changed her. The full weight of who he was, the most wanted enemy of her people, settled upon her not as a burden of guilt, but as a complex truth. He was that, yes. But he was also the man who had looked at her with gratitude in his eyes, who had shared stories and quiet laughter in the confines of her lodge, who had shown her that even across the deepest divides of hatred and war, humanity could persist. Istis did not seek to rejoin the bustling heart of her village. Her place remained on the periphery, but the nature of her isolation had transformed. It was no longer a retreat born of sorrow, but a space of quiet contemplation, of a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She had faced her own prejudices, her own desire for vengeance, and had chosen a different path. The wound of Mato's loss remained, a scar that would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her entirely. She continued to live by the creek, the seasons turning, the land her steadfast companion. The Paha Sapa still loomed in the distance, but now, when she looked at them, she felt not unworthiness, but a quiet strength, an understanding that true belonging came not from conforming to expectations, but from listening to the deepest truths of one's own heart. She had learned that resilience was not just about enduring hardship, but about the courage to choose compassion in the face of hatred, and that sometimes the most unexpected kindness could illuminate the darkest paths, leading not to an easy destination, but to a profound and transformative understanding of oneself and the intricate, often painful, tapestry of life. The wind still blew, but now Istis felt it was carrying whispers of hope and the enduring possibility of connection, even in a world determined to tear people apart.